ChaiFM 101.9 megahertz of life.
Jordan Steckler. Jordan is a research analyst at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Jordan, good afternoon to you. Thanks for talking to us on 101.9 ChaiFM.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jordan, interesting times. We all in South Africa woke up yesterday, might have been the day before, I don't know, I've lost track of time, to see that there is a alleged plot against the American ambassador to South Africa by Iran in order to avenge the death of Soleimani. What do you know about this? Is there truth to this story?
We know that Iran's leadership has promised harsh revenge for the killing of Soleimani. And in the days after the drone strike that took him out, Iran launched a ballistic missile salvo that targeted U.S. troops in Iraq. And it led to about 100 soldiers suffering traumatic brain injuries. But Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, referred to that attack as just a slap in the face and has promised further revenge at the time of Iran's choosing. So Iran's plans have been put on ice for a while. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, and it's been dealing with internal unrest and economic woes. But it apparently has not dropped its desire to strike back against the U.S., and so there's very likely to be credence to these reports.
Have you, in your capacity as research analyst at United Against a Nuclear Iran, seen any reaction from the South African authorities whatsoever about this story?
Yes, I did see that they put out, the State Security Agency issued a statement that the agency is working with all its partners to ensure that no harm will be suffered by the U.S. ambassador. But they appeared to have been caught relatively by surprise and said that they had only found out about it after it was reported in the U.S. media.
It's just interesting to me because one would have thought if such a plot in fact did exist and I as a South African government found out this was happening under my watch, I would be doing all things possible to condemn and ensure that this never happens again. I mean, I don't know if they would go as far as getting rid of the Iranian ambassador, but maybe that's something that needed to be looked at.
Absolutely. I think that it's important that South Africa needs to impress on Iran in no uncertain terms that it would tolerate an attack against the U.S. On its territory. And it's noteworthy, I think, that Iran has invested considerably in cultivating defense and diplomatic ties with South Africa as part of its efforts to weather international isolation over its nuclear program. I know that Iran and Saudi Arabia have sort of competed for influence across Africa, and South Africa has been kind of the linchpin of Iran's regional strategy to weather isolation. And so South Africa needs to let Iran know that all that effort would be just completely wasted if it was to go after the American ambassador.
Tell us a little bit about your organization, this United Against a Nuclear Iran. How long have you been around, and what kind of clout do you have?
So UANI, United Against Nuclear Iran, has been around for over a decade and is one of the leading organizations in America in terms of pushing back against Iran's malign nuclear and regional activities. We have close ties with many in government. Our board has a lot of prominent figures, including John Bolton, Jeb Bush, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. So we have a lot of ties to the government, and we've been at the forefront of pushing back against Iran's.
So, Jordan, whilst
activities.
I understand the importance of what you're doing, what really concerns me as somebody pretty much in the center is that Israel used to enjoy bipartisan, almost unqualified bipartisan support within the United States. The Iranian nuclear issue raised its head. The next thing, Bibi Netanyahu was flying to the States to address Congress to pretty much undermine the president in front of the president. And it seems to me that something dangerous happened then. It seems to me that Israel from that point on has become a bit of a partisan issue. How would you refute that?
I'm not 100% sure that I would. I think that the Trump administration has, I think, been somewhat willing to use Israel as a political wedge issue. But I know that within the mainstream of the Democratic Party, that support for Israel just remains one of its pillars. And so I think that the relationship continues to be strong in America across both parties.
Well, that's kind of comforting to hear. And the final question that I want to leave you with this afternoon is, how do you explain the fact that Iranian values so incredibly negate European Western liberal values, and yet they appear to find such continued support within Western Europe?
That is the $64,000 question. I would say that, this current incident, or the report of the assassination, as well as events from over the weekend where Iran assassinated a wrestler whose only crime was participating in anti-regime protests, show that this all comes across the backdrop of the U.S. trying to rally support in the UN Security Council, which South Africa currently sits on, for snapback sanctions over Iran's nuclear program. So I think that taken together, all of this malign activity shows that Iran is a rogue state. And basically Iran, its engagement in terrorism, its advancement of its nuclear program, its willingness to engage in malign assassination plots, it's a reflection of how Tehran views the international community's willingness to tolerate these activities. And it's time for the international community to respond. And the first step to that would be by backing the U.S. Effort to invoke snapback against it.
And yet there just doesn't seem to be much support for that at all.
No, there's not. And also Russia and China exercise veto power at the UN Security Council. So at the end of the day, it's a tough road to climb, but I think it's just important. And I think that also U.S. sanctions by themselves have a lot of weight. And so I think that at the end of the day, international business knows that if it wants to continue relations with the U.S. business community, that ultimately it's going to have to avoid dealing with Tehran.
Very, very, very interesting indeed. I must say, I did see the article in the Times of Israel this morning where President Trump was warning the Iranians that if they attempt anything such as the assassination of the South African ambassador, the American ambassador to South Africa, they will face a reaction 1,000 times as strong. I know that that's bellicose talk, I get that, but I truly think that the Iranians need to realize that Trump is not Obama. My personal take on this is that he would strike back hard. He's not going to sit back and allow this to happen.
Yes, and Iran, for all of its support for terrorism, they're essentially a cautious country, and the thing that they fear most is a regime destabilizing attack from the U.S. And so I think that a lot of the reason that this has come to light is to warn them of the consequences of such an attack. And so essentially the U.S. is putting them on notice that if they were to assassinate a U.S. ambassador, that the situation would have the capability to spiral out of control. And so they better put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan, just going to leave it there because we're out of time, but I do want to read a message that's come through to the station from somebody who is a regular listener. Says, South Africa has for many years been a terrorist halfway house, and we have all the infrastructure of the first world, but the laws and police force of the third world. This is why they enjoy operating here, lest we forget how Hamas got invited to the ANC birthday. Interesting take, concurring with much of what you were saying.
Iran has cultivated a strong intelligence presence in South Africa. According to reports by the State Security Agency, it's embedded agents both under the cover of its embassy and consular staff and using benign covers such as journalists or employees of Iran Air. And so it's no surprise, I guess, that its embassy in Pretoria is reportedly playing a role in this plot.
There's a lot to digest there. Jordan Steckler, research analyst at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Thank you for speaking to us this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.